Let me ask you a question. If your refrigerator was broken, let's say, or your microwave or your stove, would you give your whole kitchen to Olive Garden so that they fix it? And would you then be willing to pay Olive Garden for every meal you eat at home for the rest of your life? I'm willing to bet that you think that would be a bad deal. Now, if you agree with me that that would be a bad deal, first of all, you'd be paying for the rest of your life. Secondly, if you wanted a midnight snack, they might say, no midnight snacks. Or if you wanted a T-bone steak, they might say, we don't serve that. So I'm assuming you agree with me that would be a bad idea and a bad deal. Why then would you take all the resources that the people of this country own in common, that the people of this country have managed well, as long as the wealthy and others in society are willing to pay their fair share for the entire history of this country, including the federal highway system, which was built by a Republican president named Dwight D. Eisenhower? Why would you take the infrastructure of the United States of America, the kitchen of our national home, if you will, give it to private industries, and then be willing to pay for it one way and another for the rest of our lives? Now, everybody this week has understandably been thinking of this as James Comey Testimony Week, but what Donald Trump wanted to call it was Infrastructure Week. The reason why he wanted to call it Infrastructure Week was this was going to be the week that Trump announced his long-promised $1 trillion infrastructure plan that he built on that would restore America's crumbling infrastructure and provide millions of jobs. You remember that? You remember how that helped him eke out that electoral college win by winning the blue-collar states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan? You remember all that? Because Trump hasn't delivered on it. Well, now he's providing more detail on his plan. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, surprise. There's nothing there. So to be specific, what Trump says is by $1 trillion plan, what he really meant was a $200 billion plan, because he says he'll have $200 billion in federal spending, and the rest will come from other places, mostly by privatizing American resources and letting industry, the private sector pay the money. And you know, if they invest in anything, they're going to want much more than that back in fees that they extract from you and me. And by the way, the $200 billion that Trump says he'll spend to do this, that's not even $200 billion, because it turns out that an analysis of Trump's budget that he's already puts out shows that he's already cutting $206 billion from infrastructure plans that were already in place. So this is the classic Trump hustle. Cut $206 billion from what we were planning to pay for infrastructure, go all out about how I'm paying $200 billion for what was supposed to be a $1 trillion plan, meaning he's taking $6 billion away. That's minus $6 billion, not plus $1 trillion. And he's giving away everything we own to his pals in big government. Now, that's the Trump plan. Now, what would we get in return for that? What is the metaphorical kitchen that we would be losing here? We would be losing highways. We would be losing waterways. We would be losing parts of our infrastructure that keep us safe and alive. Speaking of safe and alive, now that part gets interesting because of course, highways are critical to our lives and safety, too. And by the way, just to point out, the conservative Republican governor of Indiana privatized the highways there, and not a few years afterwards, that the Indianapolis Star wrote of complaints about, and I quote, long waits at toll plazas, bridges that haven't been repaired in more than a year, and rest stops that reek of urine. That is the future America under privatization that we can all look forward to. But it gets even worse than that, because Donald Trump is also talking about privatizing our air traffic control system. Now, these are the guys who keep us from crashing into each other when we take airplanes every day. The Federal Aviation Administration, I looked it up, says that 2,246,004 people on average fly in the United States every single day, and that 7,523 different commercial airplanes fly each and every day. That's a lot of people and a lot of airplanes to keep safe and separate. And yet, of course, that's the job of air traffic control, to keep that stuff safe and separate. Now, we don't know exactly how Trump would do his privatization of the air traffic control system, but true to form, the Washington Post, which loves everything sort of economically neoliberal, that has supporters from both parties, and we'll get into at some point the Democrats that have supported privatization over the years. Of course, it loves the idea. It's been laid out in a little bit more detail by Republican Representative Bill Schuster, because Trump, as usual, is being super vague about how he would do it. But he's basically said he likes this Schuster plan, which is pretty awful. The Post describes the concept, and I'm going to use its language because the Washington Post editorial board speaks for the insiders of Washington, D.C. with a single voice. It says it will be, quote, a corporation supported by user fees and governed by stakeholders. Now, let me tell you one word that I don't want to hear used when we're talking about keeping millions of Americans and thousands of airplanes from hurtling to earth in a fireball. That word that I do not want to hear is stakeholder. Stakeholder is corporate speak for anybody who has a financial interest in the outcome. I don't want the conversation about keeping my plane from hitting your plane and exploding to be financial in nature. I want it to be about the preciousness of each and every human life. Now, stakeholder is corporate lingo. And sure enough, let's just say that the corporations are jockeying for power here. Here's an example. I'm going to find, okay, stakeholders. There's a helicopter guy who said he represents the commercial helicopter industry. So that's one stakeholder, right? Here's what he said right away, day one, quote, "This initiative appears to be an effort by the airlines for more control of the airspace and the airports. So while you and I want to get from point A to point B safely, and that's all we're concerned about, they're already concerned about, you know, how much helicopter preference will be given, because, you know, air traffic controllers also decide who gets to land first and all that. The helicopter people are fighting it out with the airline people. The airline people are fighting it out with the air freight people. The air freight people are fighting it out with the private plane industry, and on and on and on it goes. Look, this privatization scheme of Donald Trump's is a horrible idea. Eventually, they're going to privatize the whole government, and it's going to be like you're living in a universe that is being controlled by Comcast.